Paris, early January 1895. Captain Alfred Dreyfus stands in the courtyard of the École Militaire, and the French army is about to erase his name. The winter light has no warmth in it. It sits on the pale stone like dust. A line of troops holds steady in the cold, their breath visible, their boots black against the gravel. At the edges, a crowd presses in, civilians wrapped in coats, faces lifted, hungry for the theater of punishment. Someone has brought a drum, and the steady beat seems to flatten the air. Dreyfus is 35, an artillery officer with the compact posture of a man trained to keep his body under control. His uniform is crisp, every button and seam speaking the language of discipline. In his chest the heart is not disciplined. It is fighting its own war. An officer steps forward and reads the sentence. Treason. Intelligence delivered to Germany. The word treason falls into the courtyard as if it has weight. Dreyfus's jaw tightens. He has been kept from the evidence, kept from the machinery that has decided his fate. But the sentence is public now, meant to be seen and felt. They come for his insignia first. Hands reach to his shoulders and rip away the epaulets. Buttons are torn. The braid is cut. Each small violence is designed to say, "You are no longer one of us." Then they take his sword, the emblem of the profession, and break it across a knee. Metal snaps. The sound is sharp and final. From the crowd a roar rises, not a single voice, but a mass. There are cries for death. There are cries that name him not as a man, but as a category. Jew! The word is thrown like a stone. Dreyfus shouts over them, his voice straining against the walls of noise. He is innocent. He loves France. He is being destroyed for a crime he did not commit. His protest is swallowed by the drum, by the chanting, by the spectacle that has been built to make doubt feel indecent. One scrap of paper would force France to choose, protect the army or protect the truth. When the ceremony ends, Dreyfus is marched out through the same gates he once entered in pride. He is not allowed to fade quietly into punishment. The point is not only to imprison him. The point is to reassure a wounded nation that its guardians are vigilant, that the leak has been sealed, that the border between France and its enemies is being defended. But the border that will matter most in this story is not on a map. It is the thin line between evidence and certainty, between law and loyalty, between what a state must believe about itself and what is actually true. Paris, late September 1894. A cleaner at the German embassy in the Rue de Lille slips a crumpled note into her apron, and a hidden war begins inside the French state. The cleaner's work is ordinary, dusting, emptying baskets, moving silently through rooms that belong to other people. Her access is her invisibility. In the wastepaper basket of the German military attaché, she finds scraps that are not meant to be read by French eyes. She has been recruited for this very purpose by French military intelligence, a small human hinge in a larger machine. The paper she takes that day is not a report sealed with wax. It is not a signed confession. It is a torn memorandum, a short list written in a quick hand, promises of information, references to artillery, to manuals, to things that an officer might handle and pass along. In Paris, in the atmosphere of the 1890s, still haunted by defeat in the Franco-Prussian War, still anxious about the rising German Empire, such a note is not merely embarrassing, it is a threat. At the War Ministry, the note is spread on a table under lamps. Officers lean over it as if their breath might disturb the ink. The head of the intelligence service, already ill and exhausted, wants an answer fast. The Minister of War, General Auguste Mercier, feels the pressure that comes with being responsible for the army's honor in a republic that doubts its institutions and fears its enemies. They call it the bordereau because it is essentially a covering note, an inventory of secrets. But it quickly becomes more than a name. It becomes a talisman. If they can put a traitor's face to the handwriting, the state can claim it has acted. Handwriting experts are summoned. They argue like priests interpreting a text. One sees similarity, another sees disguise. The science is uncertain, and uncertainty is dangerous. The ministry wants a culprit who fits a theory, not a theory that fits the facts. In the general staff, suspicion settles on a small group of officers who have access to the kinds of documents mentioned. A new detail rises to the top and sticks there. One officer is an Alsatian by birth, his family from a province torn between France and Germany, and he is Jewish. Captain Alfred Dreyfus is ambitious, bright, and, to some eyes, too polished, too confident. He has risen in a world where many still view Jews as outsiders, no matter how perfectly they speak French, no matter how meticulously they serve. In a city where anti-Semitic newspapers sell in the tens of thousands, the idea of a Jewish traitor is not merely plausible, it is useful. A decision is made in rooms that smell of paper and tobacco. They will build the case around Dreyfus. The bordereau will be turned into a weapon, and the army will swing it as if it were certainty. Paris, mid-October, 1894. Major Dupaty de Clam sits across from Alfred Dreyfus in a War Ministry office, and he intends to trap him with a pen. Dupaty is theatrical, a man who believes in intuition and in the signs of guilt, nervousness, a flicker in the eyes, the wrong kind of silence. He summons Dreyfus under the pretext of an exercise. The room is narrow, the windows high, the walls lined with the symbols of state authority. Dreyfus arrives in uniform, puzzled, respectful. Dupaty places a sheet of paper on the desk and dictates a text, pretending it is routine. The words are close to the contents of the bordereau. The aim is simple: force Dreyfus to write, then compare the writing to the scrap from the embassy basket. It is a performance disguised as an investigation. Dreyfus takes the pen. He writes. His hand is steady. If he is guilty, he does not behave like the guilty man Dupaty expects. If he is innocent, he cannot understand why he is being treated like a suspect. Dupaty watches for sweat, for trembling, for a confession that will arrive out of fear. Nothing arrives. Still, Dupaty hears what he wants to hear. He believes the handwriting is close enough. He believes Dreyfus's composure is proof of calculation. He believes, above all, that the army cannot be wrong once it has pointed its finger. The arrest comes quickly. Dreyfus is taken away from his desk, away from his routine, away from the normal protections of rank. He is confronted with the accusation and asked to confess. He does not. He demands to face his accusers with evidence, as a citizen and an officer. Instead, he is placed in isolation. News leaks, as it always does. Rumor runs faster than procedure. In cafes and newspapers, the story becomes simple. A traitor has been found, and he is Jewish. The public appetite for certainty is fed by the government's need for it. The case that has begun with a torn note now requires a verdict. The state's stake hardens into a single phrase: the army must be defended. Paris, late December 1894. In a closed military courtroom, Alfred Dreyfus stands before judges who are not allowed to doubt, and the prosecution brings in evidence the defense cannot see. The court-martial takes place behind heavy doors. The public is kept out. The press is kept at a distance. The army insists that secrecy is necessary for national security, but secrecy is also a way to protect itself from scrutiny. Dreyfus's lawyer pleads for open procedure, for the basic fairness that would make the verdict credible. The prosecution speaks in a tone that assumes guilt as a patriotic reflex. The bordereau is presented as the heart of the matter, though even here, handwriting remains an argument, not a fact. Then, in the shadows of the courtroom, something happens that will echo for years. The judges are handed a secret dossier, documents collected by intelligence, shown privately to the tribunal without the defense present. What exactly the judges read and how much it influenced them has been argued ever since, but the essential injustice is plain. The verdict is being shaped by papers the accused cannot answer. The system has found a way to convict without proving. It is not merely that Dreyfus is being tried. The army itself is being tried, and it refuses to lose. A guilty verdict arrives as if it were inevitable. Dreyfus is condemned to degradation and deportation. The sentence is not only punishment, it is a declaration that the institution is intact, that the leak has been plugged, that the Republic's army has purged its weakness. Alfred Dreyfus has been condemned in secret, and now the army must make the condemnation visible. That is why, a week later, he stands in the courtyard and watches his life torn from him piece by piece. That is why the broken sword matters more than the metal. It is a symbol meant to settle the national mind. But symbols do not change facts. Somewhere in Paris, the scrap of paper still exists, and the true hand that wrote it has not been stopped. Devil's Island, off the coast of French Guiana, late spring 1895. Alfred Dreyfus steps onto a rock in the Atlantic and realizes the ocean is now part of his prison. The ship has carried him across an immense distance, away from France, away from any familiar street or voice. Heat replaces winter. The air is wet, heavy, full of insects. The sea beats against the island with the same patience the state has used to beat down his denials. Devil's Island is small, a piece of stone and scrub, isolated from the mainland by currents and by policy. It is not a place designed to rehabilitate. It is a place designed to disappear a person. The French state has chosen the edge of the world as its answer to a question it does not want asked. Dreyfus is kept under constant watch. His hut is bare. The guards are instructed to maintain distance, to avoid familiarity. Letters are censored. News arrives in fragments, if it arrives at all. Some periods he is chained at night to prevent escape, as if escape were possible across miles of hostile water. He clings to routine because routine is the last form of control. He writes when allowed. He reads when given books. He counts days. He replays the trial in his mind with the desperate precision of a man searching for the moment he could have saved himself, though innocence offers no such moment. In France, his wife Lucy fights to keep his name alive. She writes letters that must travel through censors and oceans. She sends him the steady reassurance of love and belief, a thin line stretched between Paris and the tropics. His brother Mathieu, equally relentless, begins a campaign that is both personal and political, to prove what the court-martial refused to consider. The conflict has changed shape. It is no longer simply one man versus an accusation. It is one family against a state apparatus that has declared the matter closed. One scrap of paper would force France to choose: protect the army or protect the truth. On the island, Dreyfus cannot see the choice being made. He can only feel the consequences of the first decision, and he can only hope that somewhere the need for truth is stronger than the need for closure. Paris, the summer of 1896. Lieutenant Colonel Georges Picquart takes over military intelligence and finds a new message that points away from Alfred Dreyfus. Picquart is not a romantic hero. He is a professional officer, calm, methodical, a man who has absorbed the army's instincts. He is not known as a defender of Jews. Like many in his milieu, he carries the assumptions of his time. But he also carries something the affair has nearly crushed: respect for evidence. When Picquart assumes the post, he inherits files, habits, and the lingering smell of the Dreyfus case, officially finished, emotionally alive. He begins doing what a competent intelligence officer does: tracking German contacts, watching patterns, intercepting communications. A note comes in, a telegram fragment sometimes called the Petit Bleu, addressed to a French officer, Major Ferdinand Walsin Esterhazy. The name is not Dreyfus. It is not in the tidy box where the army wants the threat to remain. Picard feels the floor shift slightly under the case. He orders checks. He pulls handwriting samples. He lays them beside the bordereau. The resemblance is not subtle. The same angles, the same hurried slant, the same peculiar forms. Here is the practical horror. The evidence that was used to condemn one man seems to point toward another. Picard's first instinct is institutional. If Dreyfus was wrongly convicted, the army must correct it. The truth, painful as it is, would ultimately protect the army better than a lie. That is his belief, and it is an officer's belief. The institution survives through integrity. He brings his findings upward. He expects resistance, but he expects the logic of national interest to prevail. He is wrong. In the general staff offices, the response is cold. A senior general listens and hears not a solution, but a threat. To admit error now would mean admitting that the army degraded an innocent man in public, deported him, and built certainty from guesswork and prejudice. It would mean that the secret dossier was a stain, not a safeguard. It would mean the army's authority could be questioned by civilians and politicians. Esterhazy, the new suspect, is messy. He has debts. He has a questionable reputation. He has contacts that are inconvenient. But to pursue him is to reopen the wound. The conflict is no longer about identifying a traitor. It is about whether the institution can tolerate being wrong. Picard makes a decision that will cost him. He continues to investigate anyway. Paris and Tunisia, 1897. As Georges Picard presses his evidence, the general staff moves him out of reach and starts manufacturing certainty. The mechanism of silencing is bureaucratic, not dramatic. Orders are issued. Assignments change. Picard is sent away from Paris on a posting to North Africa, far from the files and the mail intercepts, far from the political center where the case might be forced open. It is exile disguised as duty. Before he leaves, Picard confides in a few people who might carry the matter forward. He knows what this means. He knows that once he is gone, the intelligence service can be steered back into the desired narrative. Dreyfus, guilty, case closed. In Paris, the men who want the affair buried begin to shore up their defenses. They search for documents that can reassure them, or at least convince others. Within intelligence, a certain Major Hubert Joseph Henry becomes a crucial instrument, an officer devoted to the idea that the army must never be shown to have erred. Letters circulate. Notes are interpreted. Old scraps are treated like proof. A sentence here, a signature there. It does not matter that the chain of custody is weak or that the context is ambiguous. What matters is that a body of paper can be assembled, enough to intimidate politicians and reassure judges. Meanwhile, Mathieu Dreyfus, in France, refuses to let his brother's name vanish into the tropics. He searches for allies, presses for reviews, confronts the press. In a country divided by religion, class, and ideology, he finds supporters in unlikely places. Liberal politicians, journalists, intellectuals, people for whom the scandal is not merely a family tragedy, but a test of the Republic's values. As the campaign grows, so does the backlash. The army's defenders call it treason to question the verdict. Anti-Semitic publications frame the affair as a Jewish conspiracy against France. The streets of Paris absorb the argument and spit it back as violence. The affair becomes something larger than Alfred Dreyfus, still sweating in the heat of Devil's Island. It becomes a national fever, and in fever people grasp for simple cures. The army offers one: silence the doubt. One scrap of paper would force France to choose: protect the army or protect the truth. Paris, January 1898. Major Esterhazy stands before a military court, and the army chooses to protect itself by declaring him innocent. The courtroom is crowded in a way Dreyfus's was not. The secrecy is thinner now, the press closer, the public more aware that something has been hidden. Outside, the city is split into camps, those who believe the army must be trusted and those who believe the case is rotten. Esterhazy, unlike Dreyfus, carries himself with a loose confidence. He knows he is being tried not only for what he may have done, but for what the trial threatens to reveal. He has defenders among those who want the Dreyfus verdict preserved at any cost. The evidence against Esterhazy is strong where Dreyfus's was thin. Handwriting that matches the bordereau, behavior that fits espionage, patterns that point toward contact with the German attaché. But evidence is not the only currency in the room. The court moves quickly. Witnesses are handled. Questions are narrowed. The army's narrative is maintained with disciplined speed. When the verdict comes, acquittal, it is delivered with the air of certainty. The decision is not merely legal, it is strategic. The army has announced to France that it will not revisit its own judgment, even if the handwriting on the scrap of paper points elsewhere. It has chosen institutional honor over factual correction. The acquittal detonates in the public mind. For those who already believed Dreyfus innocent, it is proof that the system is rigged. For those who believe the army, it is proof that the agitation is malicious. Paris becomes louder, harsher, more polarized. Families argue at dinner tables, newspapers scream, the Republic trembles. The verdict has changed the task for the Dreyfusards, those fighting for Dreyfus's innocence. It is no longer enough to present evidence quietly. The struggle must now be fought in the open against a state that has declared itself unmovable. A writer, watching this, decides that silence has become a form of complicity. Paris, January 13, 1898. Émile Zola sits with ink-stained fingers and sends a letter to the President of the Republic that will set the country on fire. Zola is famous, a novelist whose work has made him a public conscience and a public irritant. He understands the force of words in a crowded city. He also understands that the affair is no longer a private injustice. It is a test of whether France can bear the truth when it is humiliating. His letter is printed on the front page of a newspaper under a headline that is itself an accusation. J'accuse. It names names, officers, officials, experts, and it lays out, in blunt sentences, the machinery of error and concealment. It says what polite society has been circling, that an innocent man has been condemned, that evidence has been mishandled, that the army has chosen to protect itself. The city reacts as if struck. The letter is read aloud in cafes, it is passed from hand to hand, it is praised and cursed in the same breath. Zola receives threats. The newspaper offices become a storm center. The government responds the way governments often do when challenged publicly. It prosecutes the messenger. Zola is charged with libel. The courtroom becomes another stage, but unlike the closed Dreyfus trial, this one is open enough that fragments of the hidden case begin to seep into daylight. Zola stands and speaks in his own defense, insisting that the real crime is not his writing, but the injustice it describes. The state insists that to accuse the army is to endanger the nation. Outside, crowds gather again, not to see a sword broken, but to see a writer punished. The verdict comes. Guilty. Zola is sentenced, fined, threatened with prison. He makes a decision that preserves his ability to keep fighting. He goes into exile in England, leaving France behind temporarily, carrying the affair with him like a wound that will not close. With Zola's letter, the affair has crossed a line. It is now impossible to pretend it is merely a military matter. The Republic itself is on trial in the court of public opinion, and every faction senses that the outcome will shape what France becomes. One scrap of paper would force France to choose: protect the army or protect the truth. Paris, the late summer of 1898. Major Henry sits under interrogation in the War Ministry, and the paper shield built to protect the verdict begins to tear. Pressure has been building for months. Political leaders are uneasy. International observers are watching. Within the army, some officers fear that the continued cover-up is more dangerous than an admission of error. The secret dossier and the documents surrounding it come under renewed scrutiny. Questions that were once dismissed as disloyalty now return as practical necessity. If the case is sound, it can withstand examination. If it is not, it will corrode the army from within. Major Henry is asked about a particular letter, one of the strongest pieces of paper supposedly linking Dreyfus to German officials. The letter has been used, explicitly or implicitly, to quiet doubts. Under questioning, Henry's answers falter. The atmosphere changes in the room. A man can sense when the story he has told is slipping. Then Henry admits it. He forged the document. The confession is a crack in the dam. The forged letter is not a small error. It is an act of desperation carried out to keep a verdict intact. It means the Army's guardians did not merely misjudge handwriting. They manipulated evidence to make the misjudgment permanent. Henry is arrested. Within a day, he is dead in his cell, having cut his own throat. The manner of his death adds another layer of bleakness. The institution has driven itself to the point where a man dies, rather than watch the truth dismantle what he has helped build. The confession forces resignations. Senior officers who stood behind the verdict step down or are pushed out. Politicians who once avoided the issue now confront it as unavoidable. The government announces that the case will be reviewed. In Devil's Island, Alfred Dreyfus does not hear the confession right away. He does not know that the paper wall built to contain him has begun to collapse. But the consequences move across the ocean toward him. The affair has changed again. It is no longer a question of whether Dreyfus's defenders can persuade France. It is now a question of whether France can survive the truth about how its verdict was made. Rennes, Brittany. Late summer, 1899. Alfred Dreyfus, thin and fevered from years of isolation, enters a courtroom for a second trial, and the Republic hopes for a resolution that will not tear it apart. The journey back from Devil's Island is itself a kind of resurrection. Dreyfus steps off the ship into a world that has grown strange. He is older in the face, hollowed out, his body marked by tropical disease and the relentless strain of captivity. Yet he still holds himself like an officer. Habit and pride are the last armor he has. Rennes is chosen for the retrial partly because it is away from Paris, away from the city's heat and mobs, but the heat follows anyway, in the form of journalists, politicians, and crowds. The courthouse becomes a magnet. Outside, the nation's division gathers in the streets. Inside, the same conflict remains: evidence versus loyalty. The Army's representatives cannot accept a full reversal without admitting a catastrophic wrong. The defense cannot accept anything less than exoneration without accepting the destruction of a man and the principles of justice. Witnesses take the stand. Handwriting is argued again, as if repeated argument might become fact. Old documents are reintroduced. New interpretations are offered. Dreyfus listens, sometimes stunned by the persistence of claims that were supposed to have collapsed with Henry's confession. He is also exhausted. The years on the island have drained the physical vigor that might have helped him perform innocence convincingly to strangers. He is a living reminder of the state's cruelty, but he is not dramatic. He does not weep on cue. He cannot create a spectacle of victimhood. He is simply a man insisting on the truth with the stubbornness of someone who has had nothing else. The courtroom waits for an ending. France waits for an ending. And yet, when the verdict comes, it is neither clean nor honest. Guilty, again, but with extenuating circumstances. The phrase is a kind of moral contortion. It suggests wrongdoing without full responsibility. It offers the Army a way to avoid admitting it fabricated certainty, and it offers the Republic a way to avoid civil rupture by splitting the difference between truth and pride. In one sentence, the court has sentenced Dreyfus again and announced its own confusion. The situation has shifted brutally. Alfred Dreyfus has returned from the edge of the world only to be condemned again, and now his supporters must decide whether to keep fighting or accept a political compromise. A pardon is offered by the President of the Republic, Émile Loubet, a gesture meant to calm the country, to restore order, to end the public sickness. But a pardon is not innocence. A pardon says, "We forgive you." It does not say, "You were wronged." For Dreyfus, the decision is excruciating. Accepting the pardon means stepping out of prison and into life. Refusing it means returning to confinement to continue a fight that could last years more, with his health already damaged. He consults with his family and lawyers. He weighs personal survival against the principle he has been denied. He accepts the pardon. It is not a declaration that the case is over. It is an admission that he wants to live long enough to see the truth established. One scrap of paper would force France to choose: protect the army or protect the truth. Paris, the early 1900s. The affair recedes from daily headlines, but the fight over the verdict continues in courts and in the nation's conscience. Zola returns from exile and continues to write, to argue, to insist that the Republic cannot be built on a lie. He dies in 1902, suddenly, in circumstances that have prompted suspicion and rumor, though the simplest explanation is accident. Even in death, he remains part of the affair's gravity, proof that words can move a state, and that a state can grind back. Dreyfus, now free but not cleared, lives with a kind of suspended identity. To his supporters, he is a symbol of injustice. To his enemies, he remains a traitor who escaped the full consequences of treason. He wants something more precise than symbolism. He wants his name restored, in fact. The legal machinery turns slowly. The Court of Cassation, the highest court of appeal, re-examines the case. Files are opened, procedures are questioned. The forged document is weighed properly, not as an embarrassment, but as evidence of systemic wrongdoing. Witness credibility is reassessed. The entire affair is taken out of the hands of military judges and placed before civilian legal authority that, at least in theory, is less bound to institutional honor. Behind these legal movements is a larger shift. France itself is changing. The affair has hardened political identities. It has sharpened debates about the role of the army, the place of Jews, the influence of the church, the meaning of Republican citizenship. In struggling over one man's guilt, the country has argued over what kind of nation it is allowed to be. And then, after years of delay and bitter argument, the state moves toward a conclusion it has avoided. Paris, July 1906. In the Palace of Justice and then at the École Militaire, Alfred Dreyfus receives the thing he has demanded all along: official recognition that the verdict was wrong. The Court of Cassation annuls the Rennes conviction. It does not split the difference. It does not soothe pride with ambiguity. It declares that the judgment must fall. Dreyfus is exonerated. It is a legal sentence, dry on the page, but its effect is seismic. The Republic has, at last, chosen the truth over the convenience of protecting the army's image. Or at least, it has chosen it enough to write it into law. Dreyfus is reinstated in the army. He is awarded the Legion of Honor. The ceremony takes place in the same setting where his uniform was stripped from him years earlier. The courtyard, once a stage for degradation, becomes a stage for restoration. He stands again in front of troops, again in public, again under the gaze of France. But the atmosphere is different. There are no drums beating out a ritual of shame. There is official pomp, restrained, formal. The state is careful with its emotions. A full confession of collective wrongdoing is still hard to swallow. As the decoration is pinned to his chest, Dreyfus's face is composed. It is not triumph, it is completion. The affair has taken years of his life and a portion of his body and his peace. No medal returns those, but it returns his name to the place from which it was torn. Georges Picard, the officer whose insistence on evidence helped pry the case open, is also restored and later becomes Minister of War, a bitter irony and a sign of how far the Republic has moved. The institution that tried to silence him now relies on his credibility. Yet even in vindication, the affair does not fully end. A nation can overturn a verdict and still carry the scars of what it did to sustain the verdict. Paris, June 19, 08. Outside the Panthéon, during Émile Zola's reburial, Alfred Dreyfus walks among crowds again, and a gunshot reminds him that exoneration is not the same as acceptance. Zola's remains are being transferred to the Panthéon, the temple of French civic honor. The ceremony is meant to absorb him into the nation, to transform the agitator into a sanctioned hero. Flags hang, speeches are made. The crowd is thick with curiosity and resentment. Dreyfus is there, not as a headline, but as a participant in the memory of what happened. He moves through the gathering with the quiet caution of someone who knows how quickly a crowd can turn. A man steps forward and fires. The bullet hits Dreyfus, wounding him. He survives. The attacker is arrested, and the moment passes into the endless archive of what France did to the man it once called traitor. The shot does not reopen the legal case. It reopens the emotional one. It is a physical reminder that the affair was never only about documents and courts. It was about the kind of hatred that can attach itself to a name and refuse to let go even after the law has spoken. In the years that follow, Dreyfus serves France again during the First World War, the same nation that exiled him. The gesture is not sentimental. It is simply his identity. He is a French officer. He insists on that role as stubbornly as he insisted on innocence. One scrap of paper would force France to choose: protect the army or protect the truth. In the end, France did choose the truth, but only after it had protected the army long enough to destroy a man, split a society, and teach millions that justice could be bent by fear. The human cost is not abstract. It is the years Dreyfus spent listening to waves strike rock as if the ocean were counting down his life. It is the marriage strained by distance and censorship, the family turned into campaigners, the friends who became enemies, the officers who sacrificed careers to preserve evidence, the writer driven into exile for putting accusation into ink. It is also the cost borne by the Republic itself, the corrosion that spreads when a state teaches its citizens that loyalty matters more than proof. The affair still matters because it shows how easily institutions can confuse their own survival with the nation's survival, and how quickly prejudice can become a shortcut that feels like certainty. A torn note from a wastebasket should have led to careful investigation. Instead, it became a test of whether a modern state could tolerate embarrassment. When Alfred Dreyfus stood in that courtyard in January 1895, his sword breaking, his insignia torn away, the crowd believed it was watching France defend itself. What it was also watching, though few understood it then, was France being asked a quieter, harder question: whether the rule of law can survive when the guardians of the state decide they must never be wrong. The answer took 12 years, an ocean, and a nation's bruised conscience to arrive. And even then, the bullet in 1908 proved that a verdict can be overturned faster than a hatred can be undone. Still, the fact remains on the page, stubborn as Dreyfus himself. He was innocent. The scrap of paper that began the affair did not just reveal a leak of secrets. It revealed the leak in a society's commitment to fairness and the long work required to seal it again.